Hello friend. I just wanted to share some reflections with you today because I've been doing a lot of thinking recently about where I've come from, I guess, and how I have recently and quite suddenly started creating art again in traditional materials after about 15-20 odd years of just working digitally. And I'm just going to be having a chat whilst I paint this most recent landscape painting that I produced. I'm going to try and keep the conversation focused, but apologies if I ramble. Rambling is something that I tend to paint about quite a bit and create art about, and it tends to happen to me conversationally as well. But yeah, I'm going to try and keep it to time within the next half an hour. But I think it's useful sometimes to share our stories and our experiences and our creative, not just processes, but also the artist's journey, which sounds very grand, certainly too grand for someone like myself. But I hope that some of this will be useful and will resonate with a few people. But I guess I'm thinking about this a lot because I'm in the middle of my life now. I hope, assuming I live that long. But it was my birthday only yesterday. I am now 42 years of age. So I am officially as old as The Secret to Life, the Universe and Everything, according to The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So that in and of itself is quite an achievement, I think. But for about 20 odd years, I'd been creating art purely digitally, using a tablet and stylus, and just working various sort of corporate multimedia production and content design jobs. And apart from the odd little excursion into illustration, just using graphite and watercolor pencils on paper, and normally I would then scan that in and work into it digitally to finish it as well. I hadn't really produced certainly any paintings on canvas or any original art that was intended to just be stuck on a wall and enjoyed for what it is, for coming up to 2 decades, I think. And suddenly, soon after passing 40, out of nowhere it seemed, I just got this extraordinary need to create in analog media again. And I think there are a couple of different reasons for this. The impetus was coming from a few different directions. The first of which, I think, was, as I say, I had been working purely digitally for a very long time, and I'd been horribly aware for some years that my work was entirely desk-bound and involved staring at screens. And because, like most people, I enjoy playing video games and watching telly and films, I'm a big cinema buff, so all those leisure activities also involve, for the most part, sitting still and watching stuff on screens. And I think so many people of my age, particularly I think millennials, we've had so many years now of just being so invested in our digital lives and so bound to the digital realm, we're all getting just a little bit sick of being enslaved by all these glowing screens and handheld devices. And I just felt the need to break free from that and feel human again, I suppose. So a few things have happened at around the same sort of time, really in the last sort of a year to 18 months, I would say, that have really prompted this change. A big one was the move from Canterbury, where I had been living for about 10 years, to where I'm living now in Wiltshire. That has freed up an awful lot of time and space for me, both physical space in terms of we're in a larger house now, and I'll speak a little bit more to that I think in a minute. And also I have a lot more time on my hands because I can work completely remotely now, so I don't have those commutes anymore. And also my social life now is very different. And I'll speak a little bit more about that in detail in a bit as well. But another really big thing that happened to me, which I just want to mention now before it disappears from my brain, is that about 5 years ago now, I found myself in a position where I was starting to feel that ache, that yearn, sort of approaching 40, which felt like a really big sort of milestone, like a big red line in my life. You get these horrible lists of 30 things to do before you're 30, 40 things to do before you're 40, and I'm not a massive fan of those kinds of lists. I think they put unreasonable expectations on us. But it is important always to think about the time that we have left to us and what's really important to us. And one thing I felt I really wanted to do, whilst I still had the chance and the opportunity, was to go back to university and study ideally paleontology. So I did an Earth Sciences bachelor's degree with Birkbeck University, and I signed up for this actually just a few months before the first COVID lockdowns hit. So in some ways, in some ways my timing was impeccable in that suddenly I found that I had all this time on my hands and I couldn't go anywhere, and I was dedicating my time to my studies anyway. So I spent the first couple of years of my degree, I'd finish work at my desk at 5 or 6 or what have you, and then at 6 o'clock my lectures would start and they'd go on until 9 o'clock at night. I felt like this was something that, if nothing else, I wanted to prove to myself that I could do this. I could do science. Because that again is another hang-up that I think we have programmed into us as children. That the clever kids do maths and science, and art and technical design are for the stupid kids with problems like me. Again, that's just my own hang-ups, I guess. But maybe you have, maybe some of this resonates with you. I don't know. If it does, then please let me know in the comments. This degree was very rewarding, and it sucked everything out of me for such a long time. It was a huge push, but I got my degree in December of last year, of 2024. Having just moved to our new home in October, just a couple of months previously, and I got a first class bachelor's degree. Yes! I'm so proud of that. And I also got a special mention award from the Paleontological Association, so it felt wonderful. But I also felt this huge kind of sigh of relief internally that it was over and that finally I could create again. And I just suddenly was gripped by this ravenous need to make art and just completely disengage with my science brain and with the scientific world and the academic world completely. It's almost like I needed a creative gap year, I guess. And after so many years of, as I say, working in a very sort of corporate series of environments, and doing some agency work as well. It was all very corporate, very London focused, and I'd always lived never in London but around London, and commuting in. My commutes would vary from, I think an hour and a half was the shortest commute I ever had working in London. Maybe a little less than that. There was, a short period where I think it was a little over an hour for me to get into work. But yeah, between 1.5 and 3 hours, depending on exactly where I was working and where I was living at the time. It drained so much from me, and I felt this need to, always, I couldn't wait to find a moment where I could just escape from this environment where I was working all hours that God sends, and having these long commutes where I couldn't use my time effectively. I'd try to read and sketch and what have you, but inevitably I'd always just end up sleeping. And I sort of felt in my 20s and 30s, if I just kept at it and I kept working and being nice to people and being honest, that eventually I wouldn't have to do this anymore. And gradually, it sort of slowly dawned on me that actually, no, if I don't make the effort to make a change, I am going to be stuck in this lifestyle forever. And was that how I wanted to spend my whole life? No, absolutely not. It wasn't. And I promised I wouldn't ramble. I'm sort of segueing, I think, now into the sort of the why I stopped part of things here. But this painting particularly is very useful for thinking about a lot of these things, and this series of Kingsmead paintings is really what has started me thinking off in this way. Because I only very recently moved home from Canterbury in Kent, where I was doing the regular London commute. I'd lived there for about 10 years or so, probably a bit longer actually. And I recently moved home to Wiltshire, where I live with my new partner now, and an ever-increasing menagerie of cats and various wildlife in the garden, which is a wonderful escape. And it is kind of bittersweet because I do love Canterbury. I loved my life there. I have so many wonderful memories of that town, and it was the making of me in a great many ways. But there's no such thing as a perfectly happy story anywhere, is there? And that's as true now as it is anywhere. Part of the reason why I've been able to paint so much more, and I've been producing print work, doing lino cut prints, and making these videos to document my process. I'm only really able to do this now because I have the gift of time in many ways, because I'm now able to work entirely remotely. So I do still have a 9-to-5 job, which I do very much enjoy and get a great deal of reward from. I have wonderful colleagues, and I work for a brilliant institution who I'm very proud to work for. But still, I have this need to create in the truest possible sense, to make things by hand. And for a long time when I lived in Canterbury, I wanted to be able to do this, but I lived in a tiny little sort of one-bed flat, doing lino cut printing and painting on canvas does require a fair bit of space, and I don't have an enormous creative space to work in now at home. And I will make a separate video, I think, just showing you my creative space. But it's essentially what you see here in this video. Actually, I have a small table in the corner of our spare bedroom, which we've converted into a study because I work from home pretty much all the time now, as I say, and my fiance works from home on like 1 day a week. So we need to have this space as a practical space for working in. But I've been able to just isolate this one little corner for creating lino cut prints and paintings. But part of the truth is that I do have the freedom to create far more here since moving, partly because my whole world has shrunk a great deal. In many ways, all my friends now, I'm still in touch with them, but we are scattered to the four winds. We're all living in different cities all over the place, so we don't get to see each other very much. I don't really know anyone. It's just me and my partner and our cats in our new home. So my social life is not what it once was. But actually, you know what? That's okay, because now in my 40s, I feel like I'm in a time of my life when I can really just lean into that. I've always been an introvert, and I've always found it very difficult to make friends and meet new people. And the truth is, a lot of the time, in certainly my teens and my 20s, when I was going out and being sociable, I felt like I was doing a lot of that stuff just out of some kind of obligation, in a way. We were all made to feel like that's what we should be doing at that time in our lives. But it never really felt like me. I would have been much happier, if I'm honest, just sat at home drawing, painting, sculpting, creating. And I don't mean to sound curmudgeonly, I have enjoyed the wonderful relationships that I've had with various friends throughout the years. And I have friends who are absolutely like family to me. But here now, it just feels like the time is right for me to just retreat into my own little space with my partner and my cats and our house full of plants. And that is really wonderfully liberating. And it's only now in midlife that I feel I have the confidence to really admit that and say, yes, this is me now. This is not necessarily how I want the rest of my life to be, maybe. I don't know how long I will feel this way, but it's absolutely right for me where I'm at right now. And the paints that I'm using to create these paintings are actually over 10 years old. I worked out, same for the easel. I put all these things away when I first moved into that little one-bed flat, and I'd thought about getting rid of them for a long time. It's like they just sat there taunting me, and every time I'd have a clear out, I would look at my art materials and think, oh, they're just taking up space. Who am I kidding? Shouldn't I just, clear up some much needed space and just let go of this? But somehow I just couldn't do it. There was something in me that said, no, as long as you have these materials to hand, when you're ready, you'll be able to do this again. And I felt this when we moved here. Again, I had this conundrum, I need to travel light. Do I just get rid of these? Do I just let go of all those hopes and dreams from a very distant past, when I wanted to be the kind of person who would make paintings and do printing and lovely ornate drawings again. And I sort of realised that maybe this was the turning point, that when we moved to Wiltshire, it was kind of make or break. I would either do this or I didn't, but I had to bring these paints with me. And I wasn't even sure if they would be usable anymore. I thought they must be absolutely solid after 12 plus years of sitting in my little easel. It's like a box easel, so you can just carry your paints around. But I was astonished. No, they work just fine. Some of them are pretty grainy, if I'm honest, and not very usable. But they were all right for just doing some of the groundwork. And I have invested in some replacements since I started painting. But it's quite a lovely thought, I think, knowing that these paints were waiting there patiently for me all those years, trusting that someday I would come back to painting and they would have a purpose again, I suppose. But this subject, the Kingsmead paintings that I've produced, these meadow scenes, actually depict a little area just outside that housing estate where I lived in Canterbury, in that tiny little flat that seemed to have no space ever. And it was very special to me. It was the first place that I ever actually owned myself after renting for a very long time. But it was also very difficult trying then to move for all kinds of reasons that I won't go into now. But I had some corporate jobs during my time there that were very stressful and horribly draining and really humiliating, if I'm honest. People would treat me like dirt, and I felt like I was completely disempowered and not really able to do anything about it. And I was horribly stressed. And there were days when I would just have to go for a walk for 5-10 minutes here and there, just around the neighbourhood, to try and get my head together and escape into what tiny little vestiges of nature were hiding sort of all around the fridges of this sort of suburban new builds environment. And these wild meadow flowers that I'm painting are from this really quite small little strip of meadow that was, I think, deliberately planted and left to go wild with some sort of minor sort of cultivation from local volunteer groups. It was just along the edges of the playing field, so between the houses and the playing fields, and there was this strip of wildflowers and long grasses with lovely sort of long-stemmed teasels and foxgloves and things that birds just love to perch on, and they dine on the seeds. And it was just this lovely little island of beauty. And even though it looked chaotic, and I've tried to convey that in these paintings, that sort of glorious chaos that you get in a very thick meadow with all these different plants, some quite green, some quite dry from the previous year's growth, or some things that have just been so bleached by the sun that they're a bit cripsy, all just layered on top of one another, everything jostling for position, looking for the light and searching for pollinators, and this glorious sort of riotous hum of bees and flies and birds and little mammals scurrying through. That to me is a lot more calming and grounding than any kind of stillness that I feel always feels a bit artificial. I'm not really sure if I'm explaining that terribly well, but this little section of meadow really was a little sanctuary that would save my sanity on those days when I felt so stressed and like I couldn't take it anymore. I was feeling directionless and a bit hopeless and uncertain what the future would hold. So I've spoken a little bit about why I've started painting again now and creating art generally. As I say, I'm also enjoying lino cut printing, which again I only got into just before leaving Canterbury. That was one thing that I could start doing in my tiny little flat. But the reason why I stopped making art is really very complicated, and a lot of it was down to the practicalities of space. And certainly when I was younger, in my sort of early and mid-20s, I'd end up having to move around quite a lot. Life felt quite transient. And I think there are a lot of expectations from when I was younger about what I would do with my life and how I was going to make my way in the world. And I've always been a bit of a rebellious person deep down. I'm not sort of recalcitrant or argumentative or anything in person, but I am certainly a contrarian. I like to buck the trend, not for the sake of it. It's just there's something in me that bristles when there's, you know, an expectation placed upon me, I suppose. That sounds really arrogant. But I think there was a lot of expectation when I was younger, particularly in secondary school, that I would specialise in fine art, and I would end up going down the fine art route, or possibly illustration. And there was a big part of me that wanted to do that, but I was also horribly aware of how difficult that lifestyle can be. And money has always been quite precarious in my life, and I was horribly aware of the very pressing need to make a decent living. And I felt that, plus all the pressure of being expected to succeed at art if I pursued that as a career, was just a bit too much for me in my teens and my 20s. So trying to unpack why I made art in the first place before I found myself in this situation where, as I say, for all these complicated reasons, I felt that I either couldn't create analog traditional art anymore, or I just didn't want to, for various reasons. Working out why I loved it so much, yeah, it's difficult to unpack, because I think we all make art when we're children just because it's fun. It's a way to disappear into fantasy worlds in many ways. And I do remember there was a phase I went through when I was, I think, around 11 or 12, when I started sort of trying to really get serious about particularly drawing and to an extent painting as well. Because when I was a child, it was always impressed upon me by my family and teachers and other kids at school that I was good. People were always, they seemed to be astounded that I could draw, particularly animals and mythical creatures and prehistoric animals. As I say, I love my dinosaurs, so I was just constantly drawing dinosaurs all the time. And to me, that gave me great validation, because it felt like that was the only thing I was really good at, really. So, yeah, I think it's probably a common thing for a lot of creative kids that we end up drawing more and more. Sometimes not necessarily because it's something that we want to do, but because we get praise for it, and we're all programmed to want more praise, aren't we? We are social animals. We want to be accepted as useful and beneficial to our tribe, to our community, to our family. So that's quite natural. But a big thing that happened to me as a child, which I don't want to go into too much detail here, is that my mum very sadly died very young. She was only 46, maybe 47, and I was only 10 at that time, so that was like a huge bomb that just went off in my life. And various other terrible things happened immediately following as well, which just completely upended me and sent me into a bit of an emotional breakdown, if I'm honest, for a couple of years. As I say, I don't want to dwell on that too much here because it's very personal, and it's not really what you signed up for. But it's important to talk about because these things do shape our lives emotionally, and anything that shapes you emotionally will shape you creatively. But as I sort of gradually found I was emerging from that horrible depression that just felt like it took away all agency from me. It's as if for over a year I was just walking around in a coma, really not thinking or feeling anything particularly. And gradually, as I came back to life, I was continuing to draw, but in quite a different way. My work was very illustrative. I was copying lots of photos of wildlife from the lovely sort of big coffee table style wildlife books that we always had around the home. The Trials of Life, one of the earlier David Attenborough series, that was a really big deal when I was a kid. It was a huge sort of telly event. And we had lots of similar books around the house. I was very into my natural history and my science, and still not sure if I wanted to be a paleontologist at this point and go more of a science route, or be a fine artist like David Shepherd. I discovered his work, I think, around this sort of time. I was sort of at this crossroads where I was just getting really heavily into nature art. And there's all sorts of reasons why I think I found that particular sort of art discipline. I don't know if I'd say it's liberating. It just felt like it was home to me. It suited my practice, my interests, my inclinations, and certainly having sort of grown up for the first sort of 4 or 5 years of my life in this beautiful, very rural English village, where it just seemed to be like, constant summer, and then you'd have a winter that was beautifully crisp and snowy, and then golden autumns, beautiful springs sort of interspersed. Those were my misty, like a rose-tinted memories. Then finding myself in this very sort of very suburban, drab, deeply depressing series of environments. Wildlife art and nature art helped me to escape mentally from all of that, back into nature, into that world where everything is beautiful. Even the terrifying, violent, ugly stuff in nature, it all has a place and a purpose. There is a wonderful synchronicity within that glorious complexity that I find very soothing, especially at this time in my life when I was faced with just the most horrible reality that I needed to escape from. And I feel I need to stop at this point and apologise for the colour grading in a lot of these sequences. When I was painting this painting, it was very changeable weather back in the spring, so it was just impossible to find camera settings that could deal with this constantly changing sort of lighting conditions. So yeah, I've tried to smooth it out a little bit with my color grading in editing, but yeah, I'd never want to spend too much time with post-production work on my own videos. I worked as a motion graphics designer and a video editor for some years, and you know, I'm done with that. I don't feel any need to do it for my own videos. You know, it's not a corporate job. It's just sharing my practice and some thoughts and reflections on where I'm at now, really. So apologies again, rambling a bit. I slightly derailed myself. And it's also important to remember that when I was in school, like I left secondary school around the turn of the millennium, sort of 99, 2000, that sort of time. The internet was still very young, and social media wasn't a thing. So yeah, it was a lot tougher back then, I think, to market your art when you were just starting out, if you had no connections in the art world. Whereas now, of course, things are very different. So I'm allowing myself to think slightly differently about what I create and how I create it and why I create it. And at the moment, I'm just enjoying this freedom and vindication of knowing that even after so many years of not touching my paints at all, I can pick them up again. They work, which is remarkable. But also I work, which is even more remarkable after such a long hiatus. I do find that it's not coming as necessarily as it used to. Part of that is just being older and more perfectionist and more serious about actually creating art that I can sell to clients, rather than when I was a teenager I would draw and paint stuff just because I wanted to draw it and paint it. So I've tried to recapture that sense of joy with these paintings, and that's why I'm going back over these chicory flowers, which initially I realised after I'd almost finished, I painted them in a very sort of quite tight, detailed, almost photorealistic way, and that's not what I'd wanted for this painting. So I think I'm going to leave it there just for now. I hope that this video has been useful to you. Maybe some of it has resonated with you. If so, then please do let me know in the comments. I will probably make some more videos where I go into some of this stuff in a bit more depth, but I think that's probably it for now. So I hope to see you again soon in the next video, and until then, take good care of yourself and enjoy getting creative. Bye bye now. Ta-ta.